everybody, welcome back to the channel. Happy Saturday. Today I give you some more reasons that Britain was a Bellend. The history you didn't get taught at school. We saved billions of lives in a Bellendy way. Famed Brit Edward Jenner eradicated a disease that was killing 50 million people a year. He saved an impossible number of lives, possibly even going into billions. He may have saved more lives than any other human in history, but you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, and by eggs I mean 8-year-old kids. In 1796, smallpox was running rampant. It killed around 10% of the population and up to 20% of people dumb enough to live in the city, where, to repeat the last bit of this sentence, 20% of the population was being killed by an infectious disease. Jenner was a physician who would deliberately infect children with small amounts of smallpox in order to inoculate them. Many of them, of course, died, but this was standard practice and was preferable to them receiving a larger dose of smallpox later on. Don't judge the wanker just yet. Living in a rural area, Jenner had heard rumours that milkmaids were immune to smallpox. He guessed, based on theirs and others' reports, that their immunity came from being exposed to cowpox, which was similar to smallpox. He decided to test this hypothesis by injecting the pus of an infected milkmaid into the 8-year-old son of his gardener. You can start judging now. There are some grey areas when it comes to medical research, but cutting your employee's son and rubbing a deadly disease into the wound is what's scientifically known as a bit of a no-no. Imagine if your own boss came to you and asked, "Hey, do you mind if I borrow your son?" "Why?" "You'll get him back, probably, one way or the other." "Do you mind if I just have a quick chat with HR?" "Look, let me inject the fucking plague into your son. Do you want to remain employed, yes or no?" One might say there's quite a lot of coercion involved. And so Jenner injected the pus from cowpox-infected milkmaid Sarah Nelms into 8-year-old James Phipps. Phipps got ill, the predictable little shit, and took 10 days to recover. Having successfully not killed the boy, Jenner pushed his luck again and injected him with actual smallpox this time. It was a huge risk. If he got it wrong, who would mow his lawn? You can't exactly tell the father of the kid you killed, "I think you missed a bit while streaming." But you also can't fire the father of the kid you just killed without looking like a dick. Phipps shared his bed with 2 siblings as well, risking wiping out a whole generation of gardeners in one go. However, it paid off. Phipps was immune. Jenner injected the boy, who wasn't being compensated for his trouble, a further 20 times, just to be sure. When he tried to publish his paper, it was rejected, leading Jenner to continue to experiment on poor farm workers, their children and workhouse inmates over the next 2 years. Basically, if they were vulnerable, Jenner was waiting nearby in the shadows, ready to pounce with a syringe full of deadly disease. His experiments were successful, and he went on to save a ridiculous number of lives through his willingness to inject the poor based on scant and mainly anecdotal evidence. Superhero, sure. Bellend? Absolutely. We shipped people to the other side of the planet for receiving stolen bacon. In 1776, the USA became independent. This gave us a problem in that America used to be where we dumped a lot of our criminals. The problem was compounded by the growing number of people turning to crime due to population growth, overcrowding, unemployment and poverty. Fortunately, in 1770, James Cook had claimed the east coast of Australia for the British. We saw a beautiful sprawling paradise thousands of miles away and thought, what a lovely place to dispose of the poor we can't afford to throw in the clink. In the first shipment of our convicts to Australia in 1788, we sent 775 prisoners on 11 ships, including one vessel named, I shit you not, Friendship. The convicts were chained below decks for the 6 months of their gruelling voyage. About 10% died on that first journey, and around 30% on later trips. The first shipment of criminals was sent with only enough food to last until they'd established their own food supplies. Unfortunately, not enough skilled farmers committed crimes that year, and so the people who arrived lacked the expertise to farm enough food to live, and deaths due to food shortages were high. Deportation was basically like the death penalty, but with a fun roulette element. Once the colonies were survivable, the horror was far from over. Before you could say, "Surf's up," the people who survived the journey were set to back-breaking work creating colonies. Work in the penal colonies was hard, and punishments were notoriously brutal. People convicted of further crimes whilst in the penal colonies could be sent to Norfolk Island, a penal colony between Australia and New Zealand. Why can't I say colony? Where they'd face even worse conditions. On this island, punishments included lashing people, sometimes nearly 100 times in one sitting. After one mutiny at the Norfolk Island prison in 1834, a vicar visited to inform the prisoners who was to be executed. To give you an indication of the conditions he found at the prison, he wrote, "It is a literal fact that each man who heard of his condemnation to death went down on his knees with dry eyes and thanked God," making Norfolk Island only mildly worse than the UK's original Norfolk. So what kind of horrendous crimes would you have to commit to get yourself sent across the world to such harsh conditions and treatment? Anything from stealing a single handkerchief to impersonating a naval officer. People convicted of serious crimes, murder, rape, etc., were executed. Deportation to penal colonies was mainly reserved for petty criminals, who we believed couldn't be reformed but needed to be kept out of society. We're talking really, really petty crime. One of the captives on the earlier fleets of ships, for instance, was a 70-year-old woman who had been caught stealing cheese to eat. She got shipped to the furthest point in the planet from us during her old age because of a crime mainly committed by cartoon mice. Another aboard the First Fleet, and so clearly one of our top priorities for urgently getting kicked out of the country, was Jane Castings, a 20-year-old, convicted of receiving stolen bacon. Between 1788 and 1868, we sent over 160,000 convicts over to the penal colonies in Australia, mostly for similarly small crimes, such as larceny of a hat, or for rebelling against British rule in Ireland. Ah, justice. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers, patrons and members. See you next week. Bye bye.